America's former vice president is back from the dead. Hi, everyone. Great to have you here for lesson 242 of Plain English. I'm Jeff. JR is the producer, and all the details for this Plain English lesson can be found at plainenglish.com/242. Coming up today, Joe Biden, the former vice president, was left for dead, politically speaking, just weeks ago. But he's now the frontrunner in the Democratic primary, the contest to see who will face Donald Trump in our national presidential election in November. In the second half of this lesson, we'll talk about the phrasal verb write off, and we have a quote of the week. If you haven't heard lesson 165, then you might want to check that one out. In that episode, I talked about the 24 Democrats who all wanted to face off against Donald Trump in the 2020 election. Today, only 2 men are left standing. So if you want a perspective on how the race has evolved, start with lesson 165 and then listen to the rest of today's lesson. Joe Biden, America's former vice president, staged a dramatic comeback in the race to become the Democratic nominee for president in 2020. He's now neck and neck with the socialist Bernie Sanders in the contest to take on Donald Trump this November. Biden is a political dinosaur. The 77-year-old was first elected to the U.S. Senate in 1972, representing the state of Delaware. He served 37 years in the upper chamber of our legislature, but he is best known as being the vice president for Barack Obama from 2009 until 2017. Unlike many vice presidents, he did not try to succeed his president. He sat out the contentious election that featured Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump because he was going through a difficult time personally, grieving the loss of his son, Beau, to brain cancer. At the beginning of this election cycle, many people thought he was too old, that his moment had passed. He himself had doubts about whether, at his age, he wanted to jump back into the day-to-day scrum of presidential politics. When he announced his candidacy last April, many people thought it was too late for him to make a difference. He's had a wild ride. Simply from his name recognition and deep political network, he was the frontrunner for months as dozens, literally dozens, of other candidates scrapped for attention. But as the grueling campaign season wore on, and we in America have an almost laughably long campaign season, he faded. Other candidates like Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, Pete Buttigieg, Mike Bloomberg, and others seemed to capture all the attention. In America, we choose the nominees of each party by state. Each state holds what's called a primary election to choose who will be the 2 finalists in the November election. No Republican is challenging Donald Trump, so he doesn't have to win any of these primary elections. But the Democrats need a nominee, and each state votes to choose who they think should be Trump's opponent in November. These votes don't happen all at once. The first 4 states, Iowa, New Hampshire, Nevada, and South Carolina, vote one by one. They're called the early states. Then, a whole bunch vote together on a big day called Super Tuesday, and after that, they vote in waves. After all states are done voting, there's a party convention that makes the official choice of the nominee. To become the nominee, to have the right to be on the ballot in November, you need to win delegates. You get delegates by winning the states as they vote. So the way it typically works is there are a lot of candidates running in the early states. But after the votes in those first states are counted, we can see who's capable of winning and who's not. As the primary season wears on, more and more people drop out, and the field narrows to just a couple of people, and by the end, there is a general consensus on who should be the nominee. That person then goes on the ballot in the November presidential election. In the first state to vote this year, Iowa, Joe Biden came in 4th. In the second state, New Hampshire, he came in 5th. The mayor of a town of 100,000 people won 3 times as many votes as the former vice president in New Hampshire. Biden was dead. Nobody comes in 4th and 5th in the first 2 states and then wins the nomination. That doesn't happen. He did a little better in Nevada, the 3rd state to vote, but things were not looking good. Then everything changed in South Carolina, the 4th state. Biden won the backing of some key political leaders there. 2 of his major opponents dropped out of the race and endorsed him. All of a sudden, he got his mojo back. He had won a big, diverse state, and then came Super Tuesday when 14 states voted all in the same day. Biden won 10 of those, 10 of the 14. So he is officially back from the dead. He is now in a 2-man race with another senator, Bernie Sanders, who's even older than Biden is. Sanders describes himself as a socialist and hasn't even been a Democrat for his long career in the U.S. Senate. As a socialist, he usually voted with Democrats, but he didn't want to join the party. Democrats now have a clear choice. Sanders is advocating for radical societal changes, including free healthcare, free university tuition, a guaranteed job for everyone, and punishing tax rates on business and the wealthy to pay for it all. Biden is offering a more moderate message, embracing the current system, but helping people do better for themselves within it. I think a lot of people saw the possibility of a socialist going up against Trump and getting badly defeated in November, so they wanted somebody more electable, more politically centrist. So they coalesced around Biden. And now they go head to head in the states that remain. The rest of the states vote gradually in groups through early June. One other thing to note. As I mentioned before, Trump doesn't have to run in these races since he's the leader of his party and nobody is seriously challenging him to be the nominee for the Republicans. That means the longer the Democrats fight among themselves, the less time they have to focus on opposition to Trump. In an election like this, the party out of power, in this case the Democrats, they generally want to decide on a nominee early. If Biden and Bernie continue to split states through the primary season, they'll be spending their money and attention attacking each other, and nobody will be happier about that than Donald Trump himself. If you're paying close attention, you may have noticed at the beginning of this recording, I said, "It's great to have you here for lesson 242 of Plain English." Previously, in that spot, I would have said episode 242. I wanted to take just a quick minute to let you in on a little secret. JR and I are investing a lot of time, and I mean a lot of time, in redesigning the Plain English website. That goes for both the free side and the Plain English Plus membership area. And as we are doing that, we realized that what we produce here is much more than just a podcast episode. And we have ambitions to provide all of you, our listeners, with more than just an audio podcast episode. In the new version of the website, which should be available sometime in the spring of this year, 2020, in the new version, we're going to be calling our episodes lessons, so I figured, why not get in the habit of just calling them lessons now? So that's what we'll do. And over the next month or two, I'll continue to drop some hints about what the new website is going to look like and what all JR and I are thinking in terms of even more great content for all of you. So stay tuned for that. We have a good English phrasal verb for you today, which is to write off. When you write something off, it means that you dismiss it. You decide that it's not important or not relevant or has no place in the future. You decide that you're just going to ignore it or forget about it. Many people had written Joe Biden off after he placed 4th and 5th in the two earliest primary states to vote. They wrote him off because they didn't think he could recover from such embarrassing losses. They thought that the eventual nominee would be Bernie or maybe Mayor Pete Buttigieg or maybe Elizabeth Warren, who knows. But they wrote Biden off. They dismissed him. They determined that he wasn't going to matter in the future, so they wrote him off. Obviously, not everyone wrote off the former vice president. The voters in South Carolina had their say, and then Biden staged his Super Tuesday comeback. Maybe that shows you that you shouldn't be so quick to write someone off in politics, right? When Donald Trump announced his campaign with a bizarre speech in Trump Tower in 2015, many people wrote him off. There's no way a character like that could win with such an unconventional approach. So people thought. They wrote him off right away, but they then regretted not taking him seriously. That's often how we use write off, almost as a warning not to dismiss something or someone so quickly. A lot of people wrote off the panic over the coronavirus as just an irrational fear, but I think they were too quick to write that off. Exports from China are way down. The tourism industry is getting hit hard, as we talked about in lesson 238. Now, economic growth may slow or turn negative later this year as the world deals with the effects on the slowdown in trade. A lot of people wrote this off as something that will quickly pass. They thought it wasn't important. They dismissed it. But now they may regret writing off this crisis too soon. There are two other ways of using write off as well, both in a business or financial sense. There are two ways of using it in business. First, if someone owes you or your business money, but you don't think you'll be able to collect that money, you can write it off. That means in your financial statements, you accept it as a loss. So, for example, if I promise to pay JR's company $100, his financial statements will say that he'll get $100 soon. But if he decides that I'm just never going to pay it, he'll write the $100 off, and in his financial statements, he won't show that he'll get $100 from me. He's writing it off because he thinks I won't pay. Obviously, that would never happen. That's just an example. The final way of using write off is to classify something as an expense that you don't have to pay taxes on. I won't confuse you too much with that, but do keep that in mind. Usually, though, write off has to do with dismissing something, whether that's something financial, like a debt, or non-financial, like a presidential candidate. The candidates for the American presidency are 78, 77, and 73 years old. Trump is the youngest. The youngest person in contention is 73. So I thought I would look for a quote about aging or being in your 70s. I found a funny one, but it's a variation on a much more common saying. That common saying is, there is no cure for the common cold. It's often presented as an irony that modern medicine can accomplish so much, but the one smaller annoying disease we all seem to get, the common cold, is still without a cure. So there's no cure for the common cold. But here is what the astronaut John Glenn has to say. He says, "For all the advances in medicine, there is still no cure for the common birthday." That's all for today's Plain English lesson. Thanks for joining us as always. Coming up tomorrow, a hippopotamus is a large animal that lives in the rivers of sub-Saharan Africa. But it also lives in the rivers of one other country far, far away. And the residents of that country are not happy about it. On Thursday's lesson, we'll tell you which country that is and why hippos live there. If you've enjoyed today's lesson, then I think you'll love Plain English Plus, our membership just for listeners who want to take that next step from intermediate to advanced. I told you I was working on a redesign of the website, and I noticed as I was doing that we have over 60 video lessons so far, all of them about how to express complex ideas in English. When I say go from intermediate to advanced, these video lessons are what I mean, and they are consistently ranked among the most popular features of Plain English Plus. You can see a sample video lesson to get an idea of what I mean by going to plainenglish.com/sample. plainenglish.com/sample, SAMPLE.